Hola, bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about verbs like GUSTAR and how they work in sentences, since the sentences are structured a little differently because they act like sentences with GUSTAR. So verbs like GUSTAR, they have this special formula that we need to use. They're not like normal verbs, so it's very important you know this formula. So the formula has 4 parts. We'll start with indirect objects. That's first. Those are to or for whom an action is done. So if we use GUSTAR, which means to please, it would be like to or for whom something is pleasing. Now these are optional because they're repeating information that we get in another section of the formula. We'll go over that a little bit more later. So what do these look like? Well, because it's to whom something is pleasing, we need the word to, which is a. Then after that, we'll have something like un nombre, a name. That could be an option. Un pronombre, a pronoun. That would be another option. Or perhaps even a noun, un sustantivo. So again, it'll always have a first, because that's how you get to, and then one of these items. So some examples would be a Maria, so to Maria, a ella, to her, or a la chica, to the girl. So we've got an example of a noun, nombre, a pronoun, pronombre, and a sustantivo, a noun. Now, again, pronouns behave a little funky in Spanish. We know, for example, you can't put yo with a preposition. So instead of saying a yo, we say a mí. If you want to use you, you have to say a ti. A tu is not a thing. Does not work that way. Now, these indirect objects inform the indirect object pronoun, the next step in the formula. So we have a chart for those. So again, whatever the indirect object is, that's how you choose the indirect object pronoun. Our options are me, te, le, nos, os, and les. So in English, we have to or for me to start, up in the top left, to or for me. Then we've got to or for you, to or for him, her, or you formal, like usted, to or for us, to or for y'all in España, and to or for them or you, plural, formal. And there's your English for you. So again, those are not optional. Indirect object pronouns, and they're based off of the indirect object. Remember, a pronoun replaces a noun. In this case, they can work alongside. Because the name's so long, you might hear IOP or IOP because it's a lot shorter. So again, indirect object is optional, the IOP is not. But the IOP comes from the indirect object. So for example, if I said a Maria, I would choose le because they come from the same spot on the boxes. Now what about the subject? Well, that does the action, just like any subject in any sentence would, so it does the verb. We have a couple different scenarios that could happen with subjects in this sort of sentence. Some common ones that you're going to see in classes, perhaps. You could have a singular noun, for example, or you could have nouns plural, so either a plural noun or multiple nouns. Or you might even have an activity, an action, and if that happens, you'll see it as an infinitive or an unconjugated verb. So like to read, for example, that would be an action. These are the 3 most common that you'll see in classes. Now the subject does the action, so if gustar means to please, this is what someone likes, what's doing the pleasing. So for example, if it's a single noun, you might see something like el libro, that's singular. For nouns plural, you could see los libros, that would be a plural noun. Or you might see something like el libro y la revista, so multiple nouns, now making the subject plural. And lastly, for an activity, an infinitive, leer, to read. Those are all possibilities that you might see for subjects. Now, people ask me all the time, especially students, well, couldn't a person be a subject here? Yeah, like, I like you? Sure. But it's not as common in class and it gets more complicated, so we're going to avoid that situation for now. It does exist, it's a thing, but it's not going to be as prevalent. Now the subject controls the verb, that's how we get the conjugation. So when we're using GUSTAR or any verbs like GUSTAR, most often we're going to work with the third person. So on a verb chart, that'll be this bottom section here. So for the common subjects that we talked about, these ones over here, where would they fit as far as conjugations go? Well, if you're dealing with a singular noun, you'll use the third person singular, this box right here. But obviously if you're dealing with nouns plural, that's now plural, so you need the third person plural over to the right. Now, for infinitives, because they're concepts, you can't actually touch this thing. They're just ideas. Those are considered singular as well. So again, if you have a singular noun or an activity or a whole list of activities, doesn't matter how many verbs there are in a row, you have to use the singular. Now, keep in mind that these verbs can use many different conjugations. You could have the present tense, the imperfect tense, the preterite tense, to name a few. So tense here does not matter. It could apply to anything, but you're keeping in mind that the third person would be the correct conjugations to use. Again, singular or plural. Now let's take a look at some samples with the verb GUSTAR, which you should have already learned. Now here's our formula again. Now let's look at this. I like the book. Let's break that down into the sections of the formula. We're going to have to reorder things. So to whom is the book pleasing? To me. So my indirect object would be a mí. I have it in parentheses because it's optional. What's the IOP based off a mí? Me. Now if I like the book, that's singular. So for my conjugation, I'm going to use gusta. And then what's the subject? El libro. That's what's doing the pleasing. So a mí me gusta el libro. Gusta being singular, and is in the present because like. Okay, I like to read books. Well, it's still a mí because it's I like. Me. Now our subject this time is to read. Whatever comes after the verb is your subject. This extra information, books, it's just there to give it more detail. So if it's to read, it would be gusta, singular, leer, and then the extra info, the fluff that's added to make the sentence more interesting, libros. I like the book and the movie. A mí me, since it's I like again. Now this time we've got the book and the movie. We've got two nouns, so I need gustan el libro y la película. Our subject's plural, so our verb is also plural. This should be super familiar to us because we've worked with GUSTAR before. Now, remember that indirect object I said it's optional sometimes? Well, when? Well, if you have a sentence that's using an IOP or an indirect object from the third person, you should include the indirect object if it hasn't been introduced before. So, for example, if I just say something like le gusta el libro, for example, that can be really unclear. It's from that third person row. So if I just say le gusta el libro, we don't know what that le is referring to. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? Is it you? Am I talking about someone or to someone? We don't know. That's a lot of uncertainty. So for clarification, you can include the indirect object, a él. Now you know exactly who that le is referring to. So if it's in the third person, it's pretty good to include it. Now back to the title of this video, verbs like GUSTAR, verbs plural. GUSTAR is not the only verb that acts this way that needs an indirect object and some sort of, weird formula. All these verbs apply in this situation. They all use this formula that we've reviewed. So let's go over what they mean. Aburrir is to bore. Doler is to hurt, but more like to ache. Like, oh, my foot is really hurting me right now. Encantar is to love, like, oh, I love this book. Fascinar, to fascinate. Gustar, we've already covered. We think of it now as to like, but in Old English it's more like to please. Importar is to matter. Interesar is to interest. Molestar means to bother or annoy. And parecer means to seem. And quedar means to fit, as in clothing. Now these last two are a little bit tricky because we need to add other information to the sentences to make them make sense. So, for example, when we talk about parecer, you need to say what something seems. So very often you're going to include probably some sort of adjective to go with it. Like, oh, the movie seems boring to me. Or the movie seems interesting to me. Then with to fit, you typically say how something fits. So bien is very common in mal, so well or poorly, to say how something fits. So keep that in mind when we're working with these verbs. Now, I've got some examples here for you. Pause the video and try them on your own, translating these sentences using the formula we talked about. Alright, let's translate these. Número uno. That movie bored me. Or that movie was boring to me. Now, to whom was it boring? Me. Optional, so I put it in parentheses. IOP, me. Now, because it was the movie, it's singular, but we have bored, so it's aburrió, el pretérito. And then our subject, esa película, that movie. So, me aburrió esa película. It's like a backward sentence. The subject's way at the other end. Número dos. This movie seems interesting to him. So, to whom? To him. Now, this is in the third person, so we should include AL, the indirect object. What's our IOP? Le. Seems. What's doing the seeming? The movie, singular. So we're going to put parece here for our verb. Now we need to include what it seems. Interesante. And lastly, our subject, this movie. Esta película. Número tres. The dress fits you well. So a ti, opcional. IOP, te. Now what's doing the fitting? The dress. So we're going to go with queda in the present, and it's singular. How does it fit? Well, so bien. And then what's doing the fitting? El vestido, the dress. Te queda bien el vestido. And then lastly, special effects fascinated me. So to whom did they fascinate? To me. So I could put a mí. That's not third person, so it's optional. Me for our IOP. Now the effects plural, and it's fascinated. So fascinaron en el pretérito. And then our subject, los efectos especiales. So me fascinaron los efectos especiales. The special effects fascinated me. Muy bien. So, like I said, we need to know this formula by heart. You need to know all the sections. There's 4 parts. What does each part mean? What do they look like in a sentence? If you know that, that's a great starting point. We should already know that with GUSTAR. But now we want to be able to recognize that these verbs also use this same weird formula because they have a different structure in sentences. They're different. They're irregular. We need to remember that the subject goes at the end and how that's going to affect our conjugations. Gracias.